She looked me in the eye over her birthday cake and whispered the only gift I want is the life insurance payout. She thought I was just a sweet deaf old lady who would cry in the bathroom. She forgot that before I was grandma, I was a forensic auditor for the IRS. I didn't cry. I opened a spreadsheet. Honey, let me tell you something about a room full of social climbers. They smell fear like a shark smells blood. The music had stopped, the chatter had died. 50 pairs of eyes were glued to Bella's face, which had turned the color of the vanilla frosting on her cake. She tried to laugh. It was a brittle, high-pitched sound that fooled absolutely no one. "Oh, Mom, you are such a joker," she stammered, crumpling the paper in her fist. "A gag gift? How funny." She looked at the guests, her eyes wide and manic. "Can someone pour more champagne?" But Greg wasn't laughing. Greg was reading the fine print through the back of the paper. He knew what a notice of default looked like. He grabbed Bella's arm hard enough to leave a mark. "Bella, stop." He hissed, "That isn't a joke, that is the bank." I took another sip of my iced tea. The ice cubes clinked against the glass. It was the only sound in the room. I stepped forward, smoothing my skirt. I didn't whisper, I didn't shout. I used my boardroom voice, the one that made CEOs sweat through their Italian suits. "It is certainly not a joke, Gregory," I said. "You see, when you forged my signature to take out a second mortgage on this house, you forgot one very important detail. I have alerts set up on my credit report. Did you really think you could leverage a property I paid for to fund a tech startup that doesn't actually exist?" The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen right out of the party. Bella looked at her friends. She saw the judgment in their eyes. She saw her social standing crumbling like dry cake. "Mom, please," she whispered, tears of pure rage filling her eyes. "Not here. Let's go to the study. We can explain. It was an investment. We were going to pay you back with interest." "Interest," I laughed. A dry, harsh sound. "Bella, you haven't paid me back for the car I bought you in college. You haven't paid me back for the wedding venue. And now you want to talk about interest. No, we are done talking about money." I walked over to the table and picked up my purse. I looked at Greg. He was shaking. He looked like he was about to vomit on his expensive shoes. "And Gregory," I said pleasantly, "I wouldn't worry about the investors finding out about the books, because I already sent them a copy. I emailed them this morning right before I came over. I believe the subject line was fraud and embezzlement." Greg's knees actually buckled. He had to grab the edge of the table to stay upright. You ruined me," he choked out. "You ruined us." "I didn't ruin you," I said, cold as ice. "I just audited you." I turned to leave. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. They looked at me with fear and respect. They knew a predator when they saw one. I stopped at the mudroom door and looked back at my daughter. She was standing amidst the wreckage of her perfect party, holding a foreclosure notice instead of a check. "Oh, and Bella," I called out, "one last thing. I wouldn't worry about me slipping in the shower or having a stroke. I plan on living a very long time. I have to. I need to be alive to testify at your trial." I walked out the door and into the cool afternoon air. I didn't slam the door this time. I closed it gently. I walked to my car, my heels clicking on the pavement. I got in and checked my face in the rearview mirror. I looked calm. I looked collected, but inside I was on fire. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number. It rang once. "Hello," a deep voice answered. It was my lawyer, Michael. I said, starting the engine. "Initiate phase 2. Cancel the trust fund." "And Michael, call the moving company. I have a feeling my grandson is going to need a place to stay very soon." Bella crumpled the paper in her fist, so hard her knuckles turned white. She let out a laugh that sounded more like a bark. "Oh, Mom, you brought the wrong paperwork. This is just junk mail." Silly grandma bringing her recycling to the party. She shoved the crumpled ball of paper down the front of her dress. right between her silicone enhancements. It was a move of pure panic. The guests, sensing the weird energy, went back to their drinks, but the air in the kitchen had turned radioactive. Greg walked over, his eyes darting between Bella's chest and my face. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Everything is perfect, Greg," I said, picking up a deviled egg and popping it into my mouth. "I was just telling Bella how much I admire her. Risk tolerance. Leveraging a property you don't own to fund a company that doesn't exist. That takes courage or stupidity. The IRS usually calls it fraud, but let's stick with courage for the birthday girl." Greg's face went the color of cottage cheese. He grabbed Bella's arm. "We need to cut the cake." He stammered to the room at large. "Everyone, cake time." They ushered the guests into the living room, desperate to get away from me. I stayed in the kitchen. I didn't need to watch them eat cake. I needed to finish my work. I pulled my phone out of my purse and opened the banking app. I had set up a joint emergency fund with Bella years ago, back when I thought she was responsible. It had $50,000 in it, meant for medical emergencies or house repairs. I knew for a fact they had drained it down to $12 over the last month to pay off Greg's gambling debts. So his investors. What they didn't know was that the account had an overdraft protection clause linked to my primary savings. They were counting on that. They were planning to overdraft the account tomorrow to pay the tuition, thinking I would just cover it like I always did. I tapped the screen. Settings, overdraft protection, unlink, confirm. Then I went to the transfer tab, balance $12.40, transfer to charity $12.40, memo happy birthday. I walked into the living room just as Bella was cutting the first slice. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. She thought she could still charm me. She thought the foreclosure notice was just a warning, a slap on the wrist. She didn't realize it was an eviction notice for her entire lifestyle. "Mom," she said, walking over with a slice of cake on a flimsy paper plate. "Look about the paper. We can explain, it's just a bridge loan. We're going to pay it back next week." "I know you won't," I said, refusing the plate, "because you can't pay back a bridge loan with an empty bank account." "We're not empty," she whispered furiously. "We have the joint fund. I was going to use it for Noah's school tomorrow." "Check your phone, Bella," I said softly. She frowned. She pulled her phone out of her pocket, the newest model naturally, and tapped the banking app. I watched her face. It was like watching a building demolition in slow motion. First the confusion, then the shock, then the sheer unadulterated terror. It's zero," she gasped. "It says zero, and the link to your savings is gone." "Happy birthday," I said. "You said you wanted me to die so you could have the money. Well, to you the bank of Mom is dead. I hope you enjoyed the cake. It's the last thing I'm ever paying for." "You can't do this," Greg hissed, leaning in. "We have people we owe money to, dangerous people. If that check for the tuition bounces, they kick Noah out. If the investors don't get paid, they come for the house." "They can't come for the house, Greg," I said, leaning in so close I could smell the scotch on his breath. "Because you don't own the house, I do. And I don't recall authorizing any investors to take a lien on my property. We forged your signature." Bella blurted out, then slapped a hand over her mouth. The silence returned. This time it wasn't the silence of a burning fuse. It was the silence of the explosion. "Thank you," I said, smiling. "I needed you to admit that. You see, in my line of work, we call that a confession. And since I'm a meticulous woman, I'm currently recording this conversation." I tapped my purse where my phone was sitting, recording app running. Bella looked like she was going to faint. Greg looked like he was going to run. "I'm leaving now," I announced, adjusting my shawl. "I have a lot of paperwork to do. Foreclosing on your own children is a bureaucratic nightmare, but luckily I love paperwork." I walked to the front door. Bella ran after me, grabbing my arm. "Mom, Mom, please, you're overreacting. We're family. You can't just leave us with nothing. I looked at her hand on my arm. The diamond bracelet sparkled under the foyer light. You have that bracelet, I said coldly. Pawn it. It might buy you a week. I stepped out into the cool evening air. I didn't look back. I walked to my sensible sedan, got in and locked the doors. As I drove away, I saw Greg running out to the driveway shouting something, but I couldn't hear him. I turned on the radio. Classical music, Mozart. It felt appropriate. The overture had just begun. You know, there is a fine line between owning things and things owning you. My daughter Bella and her husband Greg never understood that difference. To them, a Porsche wasn't a car, it was a personality trait. A G-Wagon wasn't for transportation, it was a fortress to hide their insecurity. They loved those cars more than they loved their own credit scores, which incidentally were lower than my blood pressure after a yoga class. It was Friday night, 3 days after the birthday disaster. Instead of pawning the bracelet and paying their bills like rational adults, Bella and Greg decided to double down. That's Greg's favorite phrase. In gambling, doubling down when you're losing usually means you walk home without your pants. In business, it means you throw a lavish dinner you can't afford to impress people you don't like, hoping they give you money you won't pay back. They were holding a pre-IPO gala for Greg's vaporware tech company at Largent, the most pretentious steakhouse in the city. The kind of place where the waiters judge your shoes and the water costs $12. I knew they were there because I tracked the GPS on the cars. Yes, the cars I co-signed for. The cars whose titles sat in my fireproof safe next to my birth certificate. I arrived at 8 p.m. I wasn't driving a luxury SUV. I was in my 10-year-old sedan parked legally on the street because I refused to pay $40 for valet. I walked up to the restaurant entrance. The valet stand was overflowing with high-end steel, and right there in the front row, shining under the streetlights like polished trophies, were the two culprits. Bella's white Range Rover and Greg's matte black Porsche 911. I stood there for a moment admiring them. They were beautiful machines. It was a shame they were being driven by clowns. I walked past the valet, a young kid named Kevin who looked overwhelmed, and slipped him a 20. Keep an eye on the sedan, Kevin, I said. And don't worry about those two in the front. They won't be here long. I entered the restaurant. It was dimly lit, smelling of truffle oil and ego. I spotted them immediately. They had the center table, of course. Bella was wearing a sequin dress that looked itchy, laughing too loudly at a joke made by a man in a gray suit. Greg was pouring wine, sweating through his shirt, pitching his heart out. There were 6 investors at the table. Sharks smelling blood. I didn't storm the table, that's amateur hour. I sat at the bar, ordered a sparkling water with a twist of lime, and watched them in the mirror behind the bartender. I checked my watch. 8:15 p.m. The tow trucks were scheduled for 8:20. I pulled out my phone and opened the contract I had made them sign 4 years ago. The Parental Assistance Vehicle Agreement. Clause 4, Section B. In the event of default, insolvency, or proven acts of fraud against the lender, Margaret Vance, the lender reserves the right to accelerate the loan and reclaim the collateral immediately without notice at any location deemed accessible. They had signed it without reading it. They thought it was just mom being mom. They thought I was a pushover who liked unnecessary paperwork. They forgot that I spent 30 years auditing Fortune 500 companies. I don't write contracts for fun. I write them for leverage. At 8:19 p.m., I saw the flashing yellow lights reflect off the front window. 2 massive flatbed trucks pulled up to the curb, blocking the entrance. The restaurant went quiet. People love a spectacle as long as it's not happening to them. I watched Greg's head turn. He looked out the window. I saw his expression shift from confidencio to cornered rat. He stood up, knocking his napkin to the floor. "Excuse me," he said to the investors, his voice pitching high. "I think someone is blocking my car." He ran toward the door. Bella followed him, her heels clicking frantically on the hardwood. I took a sip of my water, picked up my purse, and followed them out. The show was moving to the sidewalk, and I had a front row seat. Outside, the scene was chaotic. The first driver was already hooking the Range Rover. The second was backing up to the Porsche. Greg was screaming at the driver of the first truck, a burly man named Sal who looked like he ate Porsches for breakfast. "Hey, hey, what are you doing?" Greg yelled, waving his arms. "That's my car. You can't touch that. I'm calling the police." Sal didn't even look at him, he just kept cranking the winch. "Got a repossession order, buddy. Step back or you're interfering with the lawful recovery." "Repossession," Bella shrieked. She looked around wild-eyed. The investors had followed them out, standing on the steps of the restaurant, watching with fascinated horror. "We paid the lease. This is a mistake. My mother pays the lease." "Actually," I said, stepping out from the shadows of the awning. "She doesn't." They both spun around. Bella looked at me, then at the trucks, then back at me. The realization hit her like a slap. "Mom," she whispered, You called them." "I did," I said calmly, pulling the contract out of my purse. "Clause 4, Section B. You defaulted on the moral clause when you forged my signature, and you defaulted on the financial clause when you tried to steal my emergency fund. The bank of Mom is closed and the assets are being liquidated." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the mechanical workclank of the winch tightening the cable around the Porsche's front axle. Greg looked at the truck, then at the investors, then at me. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. "Mom, stop," he hissed, dropping his voice so the men on the steps wouldn't hear. "You're humiliating us. These are serious people. Mr. Sterling runs a venture capital fund. If he sees this, he'll know you don't actually own the collateral you pledged against his loan." I said, my voice conversational, like we were discussing the weather. I looked past him to the group of men in suits. Mr. Sterling, a silver-haired man who looked like he smelled money from a mile away, was frowning. He took a step down the stairs. "Greg," Sterling called out, "is there a problem? You said these vehicles were company assets." Greg spun around, his hands up in a placating gesture. No problem, Jim. Just a misunderstanding with the leasing agency. Administrative error. We'll have it sorted in 5 minutes. Go back inside, order the ribeye, it's on me." "It's not an error," I said, stepping into the light of the street lamp. "I didn't shout, I didn't have to. And it's certainly not a company asset. My name is Margaret Vance. I am the legal owner of both vehicles. And since my son-in-law has defaulted on his payments to me, I am reclaiming my property." Bella gasped. "Mom, shut up." Mr. Sterling stopped. He looked at the tow truck where the Porsche was now dangling at a 45-degree angle, its matte black bumper scraping the asphalt with a sickening crunch. He looked at Greg, who was sweating through his blazer. Then he looked at me. "He doesn't own the cars?" Sterling asked. "He doesn't own the cars," I confirmed. "He doesn't own the house, and if he told you he has liquid capital, I suggest you ask to see a current bank statement. One that isn't printed on Photoshop." Sterling's eyes narrowed. He turned to his associates. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice cold, "I think we've seen enough. Let's go." "Jim, wait." Greg ran after them, grabbing Sterling's sleeve. "She's lying. She's just a senile old woman. She's got dementia. I have the titles. I can show you." Sterling shook him off like he was brushing away a fly. "Don't touch me, Greg, and lose my number." The group of investors walked past the valet stand, hailed 2 cabs, and vanished into the night. They didn't even look back. The deal was dead. The IPO was dead. And Greg was standing on the sidewalk watching his future drive away in a yellow taxi. Behind him, the tow truck driver Sal slammed the door of his cab. "All secured, ma'am," Sal called out to me. "Where do you want him dropped?" Take them to the auction lot on 4th, I said. I'll send the titles over in the morning. You got it. The engines roared to life. We stood there. Me, Bella, Greg, and the valet Kevin, watching as the Range Rover and the Porsche were hauled away into traffic. The white Range Rover looked almost sad, bouncing slightly on the flatbed. Bella turned on me. Her face was twisted into something ugly. The mascara was starting to run. I hate you, she screamed. You did this on purpose. You waited until tonight. You knew who was in there. Of course I knew, I said, opening my purse and pulling out a small packet of tissues. I handed them to her. You have mascara on your cheek, dear. It's bad for your brand. She slapped the tissues out of my hand. How are we supposed to get home? We live 30 miles away. You took our cars. You have legs, I said. Or you can call an Uber. Oh, wait. Do you have a credit card that isn't maxed out? Greg was staring at the empty spot where his Porsche used to be. He looked like he was in shock. My car, he whispered, my car. It was never your car, Greg, I said. It was a loan, just like your lifestyle, and loans come due. I walked over to my sedan. Kevin the valet rushed to open my door. He looked terrified of me. Good. Have a good night, Kevin, I said, slipping into the driver's seat. The cloth seats felt warm and comfortable, reliable. I started the engine and rolled down the window. Bella and Greg were standing on the curb looking small and pathetic in their expensive clothes. The wind was picking up, blowing trash along the gutter. By the way, I called out, I wouldn't get too comfortable at home tonight. Why? Bella snapped, shivering in her sleeveless dress. Because I scheduled a contractor to come by at 7 a.m. tomorrow, I said. Since I'm selling the house, I need to fix that leak in the master bath you never told me about. Don't sleep in. I rolled up the window before they could answer. As I pulled away into the night, I looked in the rearview mirror. They were arguing. Greg was pointing at Bella. Bella was screaming at the sky. They were stranded, broken, exposed. But the real work hadn't even started. The cars were just toys. The house, that was their fortress. And tomorrow I was bringing a sledgehammer. They say you never truly know someone until you live with them, but I disagree. You never truly know someone until you inspect the property they have been living in rent-free for 5 years. A house tells a story, and usually it's a tragedy about neglect. I pulled into the driveway at 6:55 a.m. on Saturday morning. The sun was just coming up over the manicured hedges. I paid a landscaping service $300 a month to maintain. Beside me in the passenger seat sat Hank. Hank was a general contractor I had used for 20 years on my rental properties. He was 6'4", built like a brick wall, and had absolutely zero patience for nonsense. He held a clipboard and a laser measuring tape. I held a large coffee and a ring of keys. You said they might be hostile, Margaret, Hank asked, eyeing the dark windows of the house. They lost their cars last night, Hank, I said, unbuckling my seatbelt. They walked home in Italian leather shoes. They will be hostile, hungover, and hopefully awake. We walked to the front door. I didn't knock. Knocking is for guests. Landlords use keys. I slid my key into the lock and turned it. It clicked open smoothly. I punched in the alarm code. 1234 because Greg is not a creative man. And the system chimed a cheerful disarmed. The house smelled like stale wine and expensive candles that had burned all the way down to the glass. It was the smell of a party that had ended badly. There were shoes kicked off in the foyer. Bella's Louboutins lying on their sides like dead birds. A half-empty bottle of champagne sat on the antique entry table, leaving a white ring on the wood. Mark it, I said to Hank, pointing at the ring. Hank grunted and scribbled on his clipboard. Water damage to finish foyer table. We marched into the living room. I flipped the light switch. The sudden brightness was aggressive, exposing the dust bunnies under the sofa and the wine stain on the white rug. I heard a thump from upstairs, then the sound of frantic footsteps. Hello, I shouted up the stairs, my voice projecting like a drill sergeant. Inspection time. Pants are mandatory. A door slammed above us. A moment later, Greg appeared at the top of the landing. He was wearing boxer shorts and a t-shirt that said Disruptor. His hair was standing up in every direction and he looked like he had slept about 20 minutes. Margaret, he croaked, squinting against the light. What time is it? How did you get in? It is 7 a.m. I said, checking my watch. I used my key. This is Hank. He is here to assess the property for listing. We need to measure the square footage and document the deferred maintenance. Bella appeared behind Greg, wrapped in a silk robe, her makeup from last night smeared under her eyes. She looked like a raccoon that had raided a Sephora. Listing, she screeched. Her voice cracked. What do you mean listing? You're selling the house. I am liquidating non-performing assets, I corrected, walking into the kitchen and running a finger along the granite countertop. It came away sticky. And this house is my biggest non-performing asset. You pay zero rent. You cover zero maintenance, and apparently you don't own a coaster. You can't sell it. Bella ran down the stairs, clutching the robe to her chest. We live here. This is Noah's home. Where is Noah? I asked sharply. He's at a sleepover, she said, breathless. Thank God he isn't here to see his grandmother acting like a tyrant. Good, I said. Keep him there for the weekend, because by Monday there is going to be a for sale sign in the yard and a lockbox on the door. Hank walked past them without a word and aimed his laser at the far wall. Beep. He wrote down a number. Bella stared at him, horrified. Get him out of here, she yelled at me. This is trespassing. I pulled a folded document from my purse. I love documents. They are so much quieter than teenagers and so much more effective. Actually, dear, it isn't. This is the occupancy agreement you signed 5 years ago. Clause 7. Owner reserves the right to inspect premises with 24-hour notice or immediately in the event of suspected damage to the property. What suspected damage? Greg yelled, finally coming down the stairs. The leak, I said, pointing up. The one you never told me about. I walked past them up the stairs and straight into the master bedroom. The bed was unmade, sheets tangled. I ignored it and went into the master bath. There on the ceiling above the shower was a dark spreading stain of mold. It was about the size of a dinner plate. How long? I asked, pointing at it. Greg stood in the doorway, rubbing his neck. I don't know. A few weeks. We're going to call someone. A few weeks, I repeated. Mold grows in 24 hours, Greg. This has been here for months. You let water rot the joists of my house because you were too lazy to pick up a phone. I turned to Hank, who had followed me up. Open the wall, Hank. Now, Hank asked. Now, I said, I need to see how deep the rot goes. Hank didn't hesitate. He pulled a drywall saw from his tool belt. It was a jagged, nasty-looking thing. Bella screamed as he stabbed it into the pristine white paint above the shower tiles. Stop. You're making a mess, she yelled, waving her hands as white dust began to rain down onto her collection of $80 shampoos. My La Mer cream is right there. Move it. You move it, Hank grunted, sawing vigorously. The sound was like nails on a chalkboard. Greg tried to step forward, puffing out his chest. Now listen here, you can't just destroy the wall while we're standing here. This is harassment. It is remediation, I said, watching the dust coat Bella's silk robe. And if you had called me when the spot first appeared, we could have fixed it with a sponge and some bleach. Now I gestured as Hank ripped a chunk of drywall free and tossed it onto the bath mat with a wet thud. Behind the wall, the wood was black and slimy. The smell of rot hit us instantly, damp and earthy. Black mold, Hank said, shining his flashlight into the cavity. Spread to the studs, probably in the insulation too. Gonna have to rip out the whole surround, maybe the floor. See, I looked at Greg. You are living in a toxic environment. I am doing you a favor. You can't raise a child in a mold box. Bella covered her nose, looking at the black rot with genuine disgust. Is it dangerous? Very, I said. Kind of like credit card debt. You ignore it, it grows in the dark, and then one day the ceiling collapses. I turned to Hank, boarded up for now, Hank. We'll demo the whole room on Monday once the house is vacant. Vacant? Bella dropped her hand. Monday, you said Monday. Yes, I said, leading the way back out of the bathroom, stepping over the drywall debris. Which brings me to the second part of our visit. I walked down the hallway to the guest room. The one they used as a home office for Greg's non-existent business. I opened the door. It was a disaster. Papers everywhere, half-packed boxes of merchandise that never sold, a treadmill acting as a clothes rack. This will all need to go, I said, waving a hand at the clutter. Staging is everything in this market. We need clean lines, neutral colors, no, whatever this is. I poked a pile of branded t-shirts with my toe. Mom, stop, Bella said, following me, her voice trembling. You keep saying vacant. You can't mean that. Where are we supposed to go? We don't have money for a deposit on an apartment. You took our cars, you cut off the cash. If you kick us out, we are homeless. I stopped and turned to face them. We were standing in the hallway where photos of Noah hung on the wall. I looked at my grandson's smiling face. It hurt, it really did. But then I remembered Bella's whisper. Just a quick, painless exit. You are not homeless, I said. You are two able-bodied adults with college degrees that I paid for. You have friends, you have parents. Well, Greg's parents live in Ohio, don't they? Maybe it's time for a visit. I reached into my bag and pulled out a large manila envelope. I handed it to Greg. What is this? He asked, holding it like it was a bomb. 30-day notice to vacate, I said. Technically, since you don't pay rent, you are guests at will and I could throw you out in 48 hours. But because I am a generous grandmother and because I don't want Noah sleeping in a motel tonight, I am giving you 30 days. The house goes on the market Monday. You will need to keep it show ready. That means beds. Made dishes done and no mold. Greg opened the envelope. His hands were shaking so bad the paper rattled. 30 days, Margaret, please, we can't. We can't find a place in 30 days with no credit. Then I suggest you get jobs, I said. Real ones, not consulting, not visionary. I hear Starbucks is hiring. They offer health insurance. Bella started to cry. It was the ugly kind of crying with gasping sobs and running nose. Why are you doing this? She wailed. You're ruining our lives over one comment, one birthday wish. It wasn't a wish, Bella, I said, my voice hard as granite. It was a business plan. You built your entire financial future on my grave. You bet against my life expectancy, and you lost. I checked my watch, 7:30 a.m. Hank, are we done here? Got the measurements, Hank said, tapping his clipboard. I'll have the dumpster here Monday morning. Excellent. I walked past my weeping daughter and my shell-shocked son-in-law. I walked down the stairs, picking up a piece of lint from the banister as I went. At the front door, I turned back one last time. They were standing at the top of the stairs looking down at me like gargoyles of misery. Oh, and Bella, I called out, don't try to sell the furniture. I have the receipts for all of it. If a single lamp goes missing, I will file a police report for theft. Have a lovely weekend. I walked out the door and let it close with a solid final thud. The morning air smelled like fresh-cut grass and victory. I got into my car, waited for Hank to load his truck, and drove away. I didn't turn on the radio this time. I sat in the silence thinking about the mold in the wall. It had been rotting there for months, hidden behind glossy paint and expensive tile. Just like them, now finally the walls were open. It was going to be a messy renovation, but it was the only way to save the house. And as for saving them, that wasn't my job anymore. My job was the audit, and I had one more account to reconcile. You know, there is nothing quite as entertaining as watching an amateur try to con a professional. It is like watching a toddler try to do a magic trick. You see the card in their sleeve, but you clap anyway just to see how far they will take it. That is exactly how I felt sitting in the conference room of Binder and Associates on a rainy Tuesday morning. I had been served with papers 24 hours after the house inspection. It was a court summons for an emergency hearing regarding my competency. Bella and Greg had decided that since I wouldn't give them money willingly, they would take it forcibly. They were suing me for guardianship. They wanted a judge to declare me incompetent. They wanted to seize control of my bank accounts, my assets, and my life because apparently holding people accountable for their debts is a sign of dementia. The lawyer they hired was a man named Mr. Binder. He wore a suit that was too shiny and he smiled like a used car salesman who just rolled back an odometer. He sat at the head of the mahogany table with his hands clasped. Bella sat to his right wearing a gray cardigan and no makeup. She was playing the role of the heartbroken, concerned daughter. Greg sat next to her looking at the floor. He knew better, but he was too weak to stop her. I sat alone on the other side of the table. I did not bring a lawyer. I did not need one yet. I brought my old leather briefcase, the one I carried for 30 years at the IRS. It was scuffed and heavy. I set it on the table with a loud thud that made Bella jump. "Mrs. Vance, thank you for coming," Mr. Binder said. His voice was oily. "We wanted to have this meeting before the court date to see if we could come to a family arrangement. Your daughter loves you very much. She is deeply worried about your recent erratic behavior." I took a sip of the lukewarm water they had provided. "Erratic behavior," I repeated. "You mean the fact that I stopped paying for their lifestyle?" Mr. Binder sighed like he was dealing with a difficult child. "It goes beyond that, Mrs. Vance. Repossessing cars in the middle of a business dinner, attempting to evict your own grandchild. These are not the actions of a rational woman. Bella believes you are suffering from cognitive decline. We have statements from friends who say you have been aggressive and paranoid." I looked at Bella. She sniffled and dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue. "Mom, we just want you to be safe," she whispered. "We want to manage your stress. If you sign the power of attorney over to us, we can drop the lawsuit. We can handle the bills and the estate, and you can just rest. You deserve to rest." Rest? That was code for be medicated and silenced while they drained my accounts. Mr. Binder slid a thick document across the table. "This is a voluntary conservatorship agreement. It gives Bella and Greg control over your finances and medical decisions. If you sign this, we can avoid a messy public trial where your mental state will be discussed in detail. We want to protect your dignity, Mrs. Vance." I looked at the paper. It was a death warrant for my freedom. If I signed that, I would be an allowance-dependent prisoner in my own life. I looked at Mr. Binder. Then I looked at Bella. She was watching me closely. There was a glimmer of greed in her eyes that the tears couldn't hide. She thought she had checkmated me. She thought I would be too scared of a public court battle to fight back. She thought I was just a grandma who baked cookies and forgot where she put her glasses. I reached into my purse. Bella tensed up thinking I was reaching for a pen. Instead, I pulled out a pair of reading glasses and put them on. Then I reached for the latches on my briefcase. Click, click. The sound echoed in the quiet room. "Mr. Binder, I appreciate your concern for my mental health," I said, my voice steady and cold. "But before we discuss my competency, I think we should discuss the competency of your clients. You see, in order to file for guardianship, you need to prove that I am unfit to manage my money. But what happens if the evidence shows that they are the ones who are unfit to manage anything?" I opened the briefcase. It wasn't full of tissues or knitting patterns. It was full of files, red files, blue files, and one very thick black binder labeled the ledger. Bella's eyes widened. She recognized the binder. She had seen it on my desk for years, but she never knew what was inside. I pulled out the black binder and opened it to the first page. "You mentioned erratic behavior," I said, running my finger down the column of numbers. "Let us talk about erratic behavior. Let us talk about the check number 405 dated January 12. It was made out to Noah's private school for $6,000. Bella went pale. That was for tuition, she stammered. Funny, I said, looking at the scanned image of the cash check pasted onto the page, because when I called the school to verify the payment, they said they never received it. And when I traced the routing number on the back of the cash check, it didn't go to the school. It went to an account held by FanDuel Sportsbook. I looked at Greg. He shrank into his chair, trying to become invisible. And check number 409, I continued, turning the page. $5,000 for home repairs, signed by me. Except I didn't sign it. I was in Florida that week. The signature looks a lot like yours, Bella. It has that little heart over the that you used to do in high school. Mr. Binder sat up straighter. He looked at the documents. He looked at his clients. The oily smile was gone. What is this? He asked Bella. It is an audit, I said, answering for her. I went back 5 years, every loan, every gift, and every theft. You are accusing me of being incompetent, Mr. Binder. But this ledger proves that I have been the only thing keeping these two out of prison for fraud. 30 days goes by fast when you are panicking, but it goes by even faster when you are busy counting money. I sold the house in 4 days. It turns out that when you remediate the mold and stage the guest room without the pile of unsold t-shirts, a colonial in a good school district is a hot commodity. The closing was scheduled for Friday morning. That meant Bella and Greg had to be out by Thursday at 5 p.m. I pulled up to the curb at 4:45 p.m. It was raining again. A gray drizzle that matched the mood of the moving truck parked in the driveway. It wasn't a professional moving van with a crew of uniformed men. It was a budget rental truck, the kind you drive yourself. Greg was struggling to lift a sofa up the ramp. He looked thinner. His designer t-shirt was stained with sweat and dirt. He wasn't wearing his Italian loafers. He was wearing old sneakers. It was the first time I had seen him do manual labor in 6 years. I walked up the driveway holding a clipboard. I needed to do the final walkthrough. The contract stated the house had to be broom clean. If they left so much as a gum wrapper, I was deducting it from their non-existent security deposit. Bella was in the garage shoving clothes into black garbage bags. She looked up when she saw me. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, she just looked tired. The fight had drained out of her. She looked like a balloon that had been sitting in the corner for a week, losing its helium. You are late getting the sofa out, I said, tapping my watch. The new owners get the keys at 9 a.m. tomorrow. We are going as fast as we can, Greg huffed, dropping the sofa with a loud thud. The ramp is slippery. Maybe if you had spent less time at the gym working on your glamour muscles and more time actually working, you could lift a couch, I said. I walked past him into the kitchen. It was empty. The granite counters were bare. The refrigerator magnets were gone. The silence in the house was heavy. It felt like a house that was holding its breath, waiting for new life. I checked the cabinets, empty. I checked the oven, clean. They had actually done it. They had packed up their pretension and erased themselves from the property. I heard small footsteps behind me. I turned around. Noah was standing there holding a backpack and a stuffed dinosaur. He looked confused. He was only 7. He didn't understand why his toys were in boxes or why his parents were shouting at each other. Grandma, he asked, are you coming to our new house? I knelt down. My knees cracked a little, but I didn't care. I pulled him into a hug. He smelled like baby shampoo and peanut butter. This was the hardest part. The only part that made me hesitate. Not right now, sweetheart, I said, smoothing his hair. Grandma is going on a little trip, a vacation. Where are you going? He asked. To a place with a lot of sun and no mold, I said. But listen to me, Noah. Do you remember the secret email address I made for you, the one on your tablet? He nodded. I sent you a message, I said. It has a phone number in it. If you ever need anything, if you are ever scared or hungry, or if mommy and daddy are acting strange, you call that number. Okay, it goes right to my special phone. I will, he whispered. Bella walked into the kitchen carrying a box of shoes. She saw us hugging. For a second I saw a flash of the old Bella, the defensive angry Bella, but then she looked at the empty kitchen and the reality of her situation crashed down on her. She just looked away. "We are almost done," she said, her voice flat. "We found a rental. It is a 2-bedroom apartment near the highway. It is loud and small. It is a roof," I said, standing up. "Be grateful for it." She put the box down. "Mom, about the sale proceeds," she started. She didn't look at me. "I know you paid off the mortgage, but the market is up. There has to be equity, like at least 50,000. We could really use that for a down payment later, or for furniture." I stared at her. Even at the bitter end, standing in the ruins of her life, she was still calculating. She still thought there was a payout coming. "There is equity," I said. "About $80,000 after closing costs." Her head snapped up. Hope flared in her eyes. 80,000. "Mom, that would save us. That would fix everything. Can you write us a check?" I reached into my purse. I pulled out a white envelope. It was thick. Bella reached for it, her hands trembling. She thought she had one. She thought that after all the screaming and the lawyers and the eviction, I was still just her mother. The mother who always fixed it. I handed her the envelope. Bella tore open the envelope. I watched her face closely. It is a face I memorized when she was a baby, the face I washed with a warm cloth when she had the chicken pox, the face I kissed before her prom. Now it was the face of a stranger looking for a payday. She pulled out the paper. It wasn't a check, it was a spreadsheet, printed on heavy bond paper. What is this?" she whispered, staring at the columns. "It is a settlement statement," I said, adjusting my raincoat. "I told you, Bella, I audit everything. The house sold for a profit of $82,000. That is the credit column. Now look at the debit column." She scanned the list, her eyes widening with every line item. "Fraudulent tuition reimbursement $6,000, she read, her voice shaking. "Emergency fund restitution $50,000. Mold remediation and structural repair $12,000. Legal fees for frivolous guardianship defense $5,000. Moving and storage fees for repossessed vehicles $2,000. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "You charged us for the mold." "I charged you for the damage you caused to my asset," I said calmly. "And if you look at the bottom line, after all deductions, the remaining equity is negative $7,000. I decided to waive the balance. Consider it a parting gift." She crumpled the paper against her chest. "You kept it all. You kept everything. What about Noah? How can you leave your grandson with nothing?" I stepped closer. This was the moment. The grandma in me had to make sure the auditor didn't leave any loose ends. "Noah isn't left with nothing," I said, my voice sharp. "I prepaid his private school tuition directly to the administration for the next 2 years. His lunches are paid for. His books are paid for." Bella blinked, stunned. "You paid the school directly," I repeated. "If you try to pull him out to get a refund, the money goes back to me. If his grades drop because you aren't helping him, I will know. If he misses school, I will know. I am watching him, Bella. I'm just not watching you anymore." Greg walked back into the kitchen, wiping his hands on his pants. "Did we get the check?" he asked, looking hopeful. Bella turned to him, her face twisting in agony. She threw the crumpled paper at him. "There is no check, Greg. She billed us. She billed us for every cent." Greg caught the paper, smoothed it out, and stared at it. The color drained from his face. But we needed that money for the deposit on the apartment. We put the first month on a credit card. We can't pay the second month without this." "Then I suggest you sell the Xbox," I said, "and maybe the golf clubs." I walked over to the counter and placed my keys on the granite. It was a final gesture. I was surrendering possession of the house, but I was reclaiming possession of my life. "I am going now," I said. "The new owners are a nice young couple. They are expecting a baby. Try not to scratch the floors on your way out." "Mom, wait." Bella lunged forward, grabbing my hand. Her grip was tight, desperate. Where are you going? You said you were going on a trip. When will you be back? I gently peeled her fingers off my hand one by one. I am going to Europe, I said. I have always wanted to see the Amalfi Coast. I hear the lemons are the size of footballs and the wine is cheaper than water. Europe, she looked stunned. With what money? With my money, I said, smiling. The money I didn't give you. The money I didn't spend on your mortgage. The money I saved for 40 years while I was working and you were shopping. I have enough to stay there for a very long time, maybe forever. But you're a grandmother, she cried. Grandmothers don't move to Italy, they stay home. This grandmother retired, I said. I gave you 32 years of help, Bella. You took it, you spent it, and then you wished me dead to get more. The contract is terminated. I walked out the front door and down the steps. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking and a sliver of golden sun was hitting the wet pavement. I walked to my sedan. It wasn't a Porsche. It wasn't a Range Rover. It was a paid-off Honda with 100,000 miles on it, and it was the most beautiful car in the world because it was taking me to the airport. I got in and started the engine. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw them standing in the window, Bella, Greg, and little Noah. Noah waved his dinosaur at me. I waved back. I knew he was safe. His school was paid, his lifeline was set. The rest was up to his parents to figure out. I drove down the street past the manicured lawns and the fences. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. For weeks I had felt anger, betrayal, grief, but now I took a deep breath. I felt rich. Not because of the money in the bank, though that was nice. I felt rich because I was free. I had audited my life, cut the losses, and balanced the books. 2 days later, I was sitting on a balcony in Positano. The sea was a blue that didn't look real. A waiter placed a glass of white wine and a plate of pasta in front of me. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Bella. Mom, please, we are sorry. We love you. The apartment is awful. Can we just talk? I looked at the message. Then I looked at the sea. I picked up the phone. I didn't reply. I went to the contact settings, block caller. I put the phone down, picked up my fork, and took a bite of the best pasta I had ever tasted. So friends, that is my story. It wasn't the retirement I planned, but I have to say the view is much better from here. What do you think? Was I too harsh on my daughter, or was this exactly the wake-up call she needed? Tell me in the comments below. And if you want to see another story about a mother who finally had enough, click the video on your screen right now. You won't believe what she did. Thanks for listening.